I never thought I'd be the kind of man who sat across a courtroom from his own wife. 31 years. That's how long Margaret and I had been together, 28 of them married. We'd built a life the way most people do, slowly, quietly, one season at a time. A house in Cloverfield. A business I started from a single leased van and a phone number on a handwritten flyer. 2 kids who grew up and moved on. A dog named Chester who died 3 years before any of this started, and whose absence, I think, was the first sign something had gone hollow between us. I'm not going to pretend I was a perfect husband. I worked too much. I missed dinners. There were years when I was more business partner than companion, but I was faithful. I was present. And when things got hard, I showed up. Margaret stopped showing up somewhere around the time she got promoted to regional director at Callaway Meridian Group, a mid-sized consulting firm downtown. That was 4 years before the divorce. Her new boss, a man named Donovan Hale, had a corner office, a silver watch that cost more than our first car, and an easy smile he aimed at everyone. But especially at Margaret. I noticed the changes gradually. Later bedtimes, new perfume, longer hours that didn't match the project timelines she mentioned at dinner. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was projecting my own distance onto her behavior. I was wrong. I was also, as my attorney would later point out, extremely lucky that I had started keeping records 8 months before she asked for a divorce. Her name was Patricia Okafor, my attorney. Patty, to everyone who'd known her longer than 6 months. She was 54, wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and had the kind of courtroom stillness that made opposing counsel visibly uncomfortable. A mutual friend had referred me to her 6 weeks after Margaret handed me a manila envelope across the kitchen island and said, without looking up from her phone, "I had these drawn up. I think it's cleaner this way." I remember standing in the kitchen for a long time after she left the room. The envelope sat on the granite counter. Chester's old bowl was still in the corner. I'd never moved it. I thought about that for some reason. Then I picked up the envelope and called my daughter. "Renata." "Dad," she said. After I told her, "Did you know this was coming?" "I think I did," I said. "I just didn't want to." Renata drove up the following weekend. She sat with me at that same kitchen island. And she was the one who said, "You need a lawyer. Not a mediator. Not a financial advisor. A lawyer." Patty Okafor was the third name on the list I was given. I called her on a Tuesday. By Thursday, she had reviewed everything. I brought her bank records, property documents, Margaret's employment history, and a manila folder I'd kept in a locked drawer in my workshop that I hadn't told anyone about. She looked at that folder for a long time. Then she took off her reading glasses and looked at me. "Did you document all of this yourself?" "Yes." "Over how long?" "About 8 months." She nodded slowly. "Mr. Callaway. My last name is Callaway. No relation to the firm." An irony I had long since stopped finding funny. "I need you to do exactly what I say from this point forward." "Not mostly what I say." "Exactly." "All right," I said. "When the time comes, and it will come, I need you to say nothing. No reactions. No comments to opposing counsel. Whatever she says. Whatever her attorney says. Whatever Donovan Hale says if he's in that room. You say nothing. You let me handle it. Can you do that?" I told her I could. She smiled for the first time in our meeting. "Good. Because the show doesn't start until I say it does." The months between that meeting and the final hearing were the strangest of my life. Margaret had moved into a corporate apartment paid for, as I would later learn, partially by Callaway Meridian Group, as a relocation benefit, a detail her attorney seemed to believe was irrelevant, and that Patty seemed to find very interesting. We communicated through our lawyers almost entirely. When we did speak directly, it was brief and transactional details about the house. About shared accounts. About the retriever Renata had given us the previous Christmas, and who Margaret decided she didn't want after all. I named him Franklin. He slept at the foot of my bed and followed me to my workshop every morning. Margaret's attorney was a man named Clifton Webb, not the actor. Though he would have appreciated the comparison. He was polished, aggressive, and had built a reputation in our county for high-asset divorce settlements that consistently favored his clients. He filed initial asset claims that were, by any reasonable reading, extraordinary. The house, 55% of the business, a portion of my retirement accounts going back to before our marriage, a claim so audacious that even Patty had paused when she read it. He's opening high to see where we flinch. She told me, "We're not flinching." I said, "No." She agreed. "We're not." What Clifton Webb did not know, what Margaret did not know, was the contents of that locked folder from my workshop. Inside were printouts, timestamps, 2 affidavits from former colleagues of Margaret's who had approached me independently, and a sequence of financial transfers I had flagged and documented over a 14-month period before the divorce was filed. Transfers from our joint home equity line of credit to an account I had never authorized, totaling just over £5,000. Ling, ling, ling. I had not spent that money. I had not hidden it. Margaret had. Patty had quietly engaged a forensic accountant named Gerald Cho 3 months before the hearing. Gerald had followed the trail further than I had found accounts I hadn't known about. Discovered the funds had been partially used to furnish the corporate apartment and fund 2 international trips that did not include me. He was calm and methodical, and spoke with the measured certainty of a man who had done this many times. She's going to walk in thinking she has leverage. Patty told me the evening before the final hearing. We were sitting in her conference room with 3 folders spread across the table and 2 cold cups of coffee between us. "She does have leverage." I said, "She thinks she does." Patty corrected, "There's a difference. And tomorrow, that difference is going to become very clear to everyone in that room." She walked in smiling. That's the part I keep coming back to, not with bitterness. Not anymore, but with a kind of stunned clarity. She walked into that courtroom like she was attending a celebration. Her hair was freshly done. She was wearing a deep green blazer I'd never seen before. Donovan Hale sat in the gallery behind her, 1 row back, arms folded, with that same easy smile he'd been aiming at my wife for 4 years. She glanced at me when she sat down, and the smile didn't waver. If anything, it widened slightly. She leaned toward Clifton Webb and said something I couldn't hear. And he nodded. I looked straight ahead. Patty leaned slightly toward me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Did you do exactly what I said?" "Yes," I said. "Good." She opened her folder. "The show starts now." Clifton Webb presented first. He was good. I'll give him that. He laid out the marital assets efficiently, framed the business contributions in a way that minimized my premarital history and emphasized the years of Margaret's income as structural to our lifestyle. He spoke about the house with the confidence of a man who had already measured the square footage. He cited the retirement accounts with footnoted precision. Margaret sat straight and still beside him. She did not look at me. Then Patty stood up. She did not raise her voice. She rarely does. I would learn. She has this quality, an absolute absence of theatrical urgency that makes everything she says feel inevitable rather than argued. She simply places the information in front of the room and lets it find its own weight. Gerald Cho testified for 47 minutes. He walked the court through the home equity transfers date by date, amount by amount, account by account. He described the forensic methodology. He referenced the 2 affidavits. He displayed 3 pages of financial documentation that had been submitted to the court the previous week, and which Clifton Webb had apparently not read as carefully as he should have. I watched Margaret's expression change for the first time. It didn't collapse. It didn't crumble. It went still the way a face goes still, when the body beneath it is suddenly working very hard on something other than composure. She turned to Clifton Webb. He was writing something on his legal pad with controlled speed. Patty then presented the affidavits from two former colleagues of Margaret's who described conversations in which Margaret had discussed the financial transfers and, in one instance, described the corporate apartment as being partially funded through what she called marital resources that would otherwise be wasted in the settlement. The room was quiet. Donovan Hale's easy smile, when I glanced at the gallery, was gone. There is a particular silence in a courtroom when something has shifted that no one can shift back. I have only experienced it once, and I hope never to experience the version of it that Margaret experienced that morning. The judge, a woman named the Honorable Sandra Moe, who had been on the family court bench for 19 years, asked Clifton Webb if he wished to respond to the financial documentation. He asked for a brief recess. During the recess, Margaret caught my eye for the first time since we'd sat down. She was standing near the door of the hallway, Clifton Webb at her elbow, and whatever expression I had expected to see defiance. Maybe. Or that same controlled smile was not there. She looked, for a moment, like someone who had just realized the road she was standing on did not go where she thought it did. I looked away. Patty appeared at my side. They're going to propose a counter-offer during recess, she said quietly. Webb is going to come to me. Let me handle it. What are they going to offer? Something that sounds reasonable and isn't. Don't react to whatever number you hear in passing. All right. She looked at me steadily. You've been very good today, Walter. No one except my mother had called me Walter since I was 12 years old. From Patty. In that moment, it felt like exactly the right thing to say. Clifton Webb did propose a counter-offer during recess. Patty listened to it with the expression of someone reviewing a slightly disappointing restaurant menu. She thanked him for his time and declined. When we returned to the courtroom, the dynamic had rearranged itself in the way that dynamics do when one side of a room has lost its confidence and the other has not. The judge addressed the financial discrepancies directly. Under penalty of contempt, Margaret was asked to account for the transfers. Her attorney objected on procedural grounds. The judge sustained one objection and overruled two others. Margaret, when she finally spoke, answered in a voice that was quiet and careful and had none of the confidence she'd walked in with. She said the transfers had been for household expenses. Gerald Cho had already submitted documentation showing that the account those funds were transferred into had been opened without my knowledge or signature 18 months before the divorce filing. The judge made a note. By the time the final terms were read into the record, 3 weeks later, a process that followed 2 more hearings, one mediation session that Patty called the fastest mediation I've conducted in a decade, and a revised filing from Clifton Webb that bore almost no resemblance to his original claims. The outcome was not what Margaret had walked into that first courtroom, expecting. The house was mine. I had paid the mortgage alone for the first 6 years we owned it, a detail that had been thoroughly documented. The business which I had built from a single leased van remained mine in its entirety, with a fair market buyout offered to Margaret for her contribution years that she declined because the number was not what she had expected. The retirement accounts were divided along legally correct lines rather than the extraordinary claim Clifton Webb had initially filed, and the $94, 0 inches transferred funds along with the additional $22, 000 that Gerald Cho's investigation had uncovered in a subsequent account, was factored into the settlement in a way that Patty described, with characteristic understatement, as corrective. Donovan Hale did not attend the subsequent hearings. Renata called me the evening after the final terms were confirmed. She cried a little, which surprised me. She's not usually a crier. I'm proud of you, Dad, she said. I didn't do much. I said, Patty did most of it. You kept those records, she said. For 8 months. You just quietly kept records and didn't say anything to anyone. I thought about that. I didn't know what else to do. I said, something felt wrong. I wanted to understand it before I reacted to it. She was quiet for a moment. That's not nothing. Dad, that's actually everything. My son, Derek, who lives in Portland and had been mostly silent through all of this, not from indifference, I think, but from a difficulty in knowing what to say, sent me a text that night. It said I heard it went well. Love you. That was enough. It's been 2 years now. I still run the business. We expanded last spring, added 2 new service routes, and hired 3 people. Franklin still follows me to the workshop every morning. I repainted the kitchen. Finally, a color I had wanted for years that Margaret had always dismissed as too dark. It's not too dark. It's exactly right. I think about those 8 months of record keeping sometimes. About the strange discipline of watching something fall apart and not flinching from it, not pretending it wasn't happening. Not reacting before you understand what you're reacting to. There's a difference between silence and passivity. Patty understood that from the beginning. It took me a little longer. The last time I saw Margaret was at Renata's daughter's birthday, our first grandchild. Born 14 months after the divorce was finalized. She was civil. She looked well. Donovan Hale was not with her. I didn't ask about that. And she didn't offer. We stood near the dessert table for about 3 minutes and talked about the baby. Then we went back to our respective sides of the backyard. And that was that. Some endings aren't dramatic. They're just the last scene of something that ended a long time before anyone said it out loud. I drove home with Franklin in the passenger seat. He refuses to sit in the back and the windows down. Even though it was getting cold. He had his nose out the window the whole way. I kept my eyes on the road. The house was lit when I pulled in. I had left the porch light on. It looked exactly like what it was, mine. People ask me sometimes what I would tell someone going through something similar. I usually say something practical. Get an attorney early. Document everything. Don't move money around thinking it helps you. But the real thing, the thing I actually think about, is something Patty said to me in that first meeting. Before I even decided to hire her, she had finished reading through my folder. She set it down. She looked at me and said, "You already know what happened. You've known for a while. The only question now is whether you're going to let someone else tell the story. Or whether you're going to tell it yourself." I told her I wanted to tell it myself. She picked up her pen. "Good," she said. "Then let's make sure we tell it right." We did.